America was built on dreams, but some of those dreams were left behind in cities that now feel forgotten. Once filled with laughter, music, and ambition, these places carry the weight of broken promises and restless ghosts of the past. Streets that raised heroes now echo with fear. Factories that powered families now stand in silence. For decades, we have looked at these cities as isolated failures. We watch them with pity or with fear. But what if we have been looking at them all wrong? These are not isolated tragedies, they are symptoms. These are America's 10 great warnings. What happened in Flint, in Gary, or in Baltimore isn't just their problem. It is a preview of the systemic crises in our infrastructure, our economy, in our social fabric that are quietly heading for the rest of the nation. Today, we decode these 10 cautionary tales. We will analyze why their decline is a warning for your future. Number 10. Flint, Michigan. Flint is one of those cities that became infamous for all the wrong reasons. Located just 66 miles northwest of Detroit, Flint once thrived as a proud manufacturing hub for General Motors. In the 1950s, it had over 200,000 residents and one of the highest median household incomes in Michigan. Fast forward to today, the population has plummeted below 80,000. The city's reputation never fully recovered from the water crisis that began in 2014. That disaster, where thousands of residents were exposed to lead-contaminated water, turned Flint into a national symbol of neglect. Safety-wise, the numbers speak volumes. According to FBI data, Flint consistently records a violent crime rate over 1,800 incidents per 100,000 people, nearly 5 times the national average. Nearly 40% of residents live below the poverty line. These conditions create a cycle that's hard to break. But the real story here is not just Flint's crisis. It's that Flint is not an anomaly. It is the canary in the coal mine for America's national infrastructure crisis. The American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE, gave America's overall infrastructure a grade of C in its 2025 report card. While that is the highest grade it has ever received, the ASCE still describes the nation's systems as being in an old age crisis, suffering from chronic underinvestment. The total investment gap to fix America's roads, bridges, and water systems now stands at $2.59 trillion over the next 10 years. Flint's pipes didn't fail because they were unique. They failed because they are typical. The lead pipes that poison Flint exist in millions of homes across the entire country. The 2014 decision to switch water sources was a desperate attempt to save money in a city that was already broke. It was a gamble made possible only because the underlying infrastructure was already old, fragile, and forgotten. Flint is the tragic, inevitable warning of what happens when decades of deferred maintenance finally come due. The question is not if another Flint will happen. The question is where it will happen next. Number 9. St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis often finds itself at the top of lists it doesn't want to be on, particularly those ranking violent crime. With a population of roughly 293,000, this city has seen its share of hardship. Once a proud industrial hub on the Mississippi River, home to the 1904 World's Fair, it is now battling one of the highest violent crime rates in America. Around 1,900 incidents per 100,000 people, more than 5 times the national average. The city's homicide rate is equally troubling, about 200 murders annually, which is staggering given its size. Factors like poverty, declining population, and abandoned homes have become an unfortunate part of the cityscape. Outsiders see the crime headlines and the urban decay, but the crime is a symptom of a much larger, quieter crisis. St. Louis is the symbol of the hollowing out of the American heartland. It is a stark demographic trend. According to data from the Council of State Governments, between 2020 and 2022 alone, the Midwest region lost over 400,000 people to domestic migration. Talent, capital, and young families are steadily leaving these flyover states for the promise of the coastal cities in the Sun Belt. This creates a financial doom loop. As the population declines, the tax base evaporates. When the tax base evaporates, the city cannot fund its essential public services, like police, schools, and sanitation. As public services decline, crime rises, and the quality of life drops. This in turn causes more people to leave, which shrinks the tax base even further, accelerating the entire cycle. St. Louis is not failing in a vacuum. It is being systematically drained. It warns of a nation that is polarizing, not just politically, but geographically. A nation that is willing to leave a vast, vital center to be hollowed out, abandoned, and left to fend for itself. Number 8. Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham was once called the Magic City, a name born from its explosive industrial growth in the early 1900s. But that magic has dimmed. Today, Birmingham ranks as one of the most dangerous mid-sized cities in the U.S., with a violent crime rate around 1,700 per 100,000 residents. Murders, assaults, and robberies dominate headlines. Part of the problem lies in deep-rooted economic inequality. The median household income is around $42,000, and nearly 30% of residents live in poverty. The original video mentions a slow revival with craft breweries and tech startups. But this revival is the warning itself. Birmingham is a perfect, modern case study in the failure of trickle-down economics. The city has a booming, gentrified downtown. New restaurants, tech incubators, and art spaces are thriving. But that magic is not trickling down. It is creating two Birminghams existing side by side. One is a city of high-tech growth and new wealth. The other, just miles away, is a city of 30% poverty, generational unemployment, and crumbling services. This is America's story in miniature. The U.S. Gini coefficient, the primary measure of income inequality, remains at a multi-decade high, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. As of late 2024, data from the Federal Reserve shows that the wealthiest 1% of Americans now hold over 30% of the entire nation's wealth. Birmingham proves that economic growth and shared prosperity are no longer the same thing. It is a stark warning that a soaring stock market and a booming tech sector mean nothing to the communities that are left behind. Number 7. Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland's story is one of high hopes, hard times, and harsh realities. Once a manufacturing powerhouse and home to nearly 1 million residents in the 1950s, the city has since shrunk to just about 360,000 people. The loss of factories, jobs, and economic stability led to decades of decline. Cleveland's violent crime rate is roughly 1,600 per 100,000 residents. The poverty rate hovers around 30%, one of the highest in the nation. In certain neighborhoods, boarded-up houses and abandoned factories stretch for blocks. For decades, the city was haunted by the 1978 river fire on the Cuyahoga, earning it the nickname, the mistake on the lake. But the real mistake was not the fire. The mistake was the belief that a city could survive the evisceration of its entire economic identity. Cleveland is the warning of the long-term, 50-year social cost of deindustrialization. We often talk about lost jobs from globalization and automation as a simple economic statistic. Cleveland shows the human cost 5 decades later. When the factories of the Rust Belt closed, it wasn't just jobs that were lost. It was community identity. It was the tax base. It was the funding for schools, roads, and public safety. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, this decline was catastrophic, leading to a 45% loss in population and a 30% drop in real income over the following decades. This created a vacuum filled by despair, generational poverty, and crime. Cleveland is a living, breathing warning that when you pull the economic rug out from under a city without a transition plan, you don't just create unemployment. You create a social wound that festers for half a century. Number 6. Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, the birthplace of blues, soul, and rock and roll. It is a city full of rhythm, resilience, and heartbreak. But behind the sound of Beale Street lies a safety crisis that's made national headlines for years. In 2024, Memphis ranked among the top 3 most dangerous cities in America, recording an astonishing 2,300 violent crimes per 100,000 residents. The city's homicide rate sits at about 80 per 100,000, higher than Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Poverty runs deep here. Roughly 27% of residents live below the poverty line. Decades of economic decline and systemic inequality have created neighborhoods where crime feels like an unshakable cycle. But when crime reaches this level, it is no longer a problem of individuals. It is a symptom of a failed system. Memphis is the warning of what happens when core public services collapse. A 27% poverty rate is not just a social issue, it is a fiscal catastrophe. It destroys a city's tax base. As studies on Memphis's economy have shown, this blight and poverty directly reduce property tax revenues, starving the city of the very funds it needs. A destroyed tax base means you cannot afford to hire, train, and retain a high-quality professional police force. It means you cannot fund the mental health services, community intervention programs, and good schools that prevent crime in the first place. The 2023 tragedy involving Ty Nichols was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a system under unbearable stress, a city too poor to fund the basic promise of public safety. Memphis warns that when systemic poverty hollows out a city's budget, the social contract itself is the first thing to break. Number 5. Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore, affectionately nicknamed Charm City, has one of the richest histories on the East Coast. Yet it's often overshadowed by the chaos in its streets. Known for its waterfront views, it's also infamous for violence. The city's violent crime rate is around 1,900 per 100,000, and its homicide rate has hovered near 35 per 100,000 for years. The original video correctly identifies the disconnect. Tourists love the inner harbor, but just a few miles away, gun violence in boarded-up row houses tell another story. That disconnect is not an accident. It was designed. Baltimore is the clearest warning of the toxic, multi-generational legacy of systemic discrimination. The redlining policies of the 1930s through the 60s are not ancient history. They are today's reality. These were federal policies that intentionally and legally starved Black majority neighborhoods of investment, mortgages, and insurance. The consequences are not theoretical. Research from institutions like Johns Hopkins University and the National Institutes of Health has drawn a direct statistical line between yesterday's redline districts in Baltimore and today's hotspots for gun violence, poor health outcomes, and economic despair. The blocks of boarded-up row houses are not a sign of modern failure. They are the intended, predictable result of decades-old policy. Baltimore is a stark warning that a nation cannot build a prosperous, tourist-friendly harbor on a foundation of historic injustice and expect it to hold. Number 4. Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles, the city of angels, where dreams are born and sometimes die. It's America's glittering paradox, home to Hollywood stars, luxury mansions, and palm-lined boulevards, but also to some of the highest poverty, homelessness, and crime rates in the nation. With nearly 4 million residents, LA reports staggering crime totals. But the most visible crisis is the homeless population, which exceeds 45,000 people. It is not unusual to find tents just blocks away from luxury penthouses, a contrast that defines modern Los Angeles. This city is the warning of the end of the middle-class dream and the rise of a neo-feudal, two-tier society. The problem in Los Angeles isn't that the economy has failed. The problem is that it has succeeded too much, creating a catastrophic housing affordability crisis. The cost of simple survival has completely detached from the income of average workers. According to Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies, the number of all renters in America paying more than 30% of their income on housing is at a record high of 22.4 million. And that burden is growing fastest for middle-income earners. In Los Angeles, according to 2024 data, a person needs an annual income of over $109,000 just to afford the median rent without being financially crushed. The 45,000 people on the streets are not just the unemployed. They are the result of an economy where nurses, teachers, and firefighters can no longer afford a place to live. Los Angeles warns of a future where the economy only works for the top 10%, leaving a new, permanent class of working poor living in tents just outside the gated walls. Number 3. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans is one of America's most soulful cities, a place where jazz flows through the streets, Creole spices fill the air, and every corner feels alive. Yet behind that charm lies one of the most dangerous realities in the country. As of 2024, New Orleans recorded a violent crime rate of nearly 1,600 per 100,000 residents. The homicide rate has hit levels 12 times the national average. The city bears the scars of poverty, inequality, and decades of corruption. The original video notes a key paradox. Tourism pumps billions into the economy, but much of that money doesn't reach the people who live here year-round. This is the warning of the vampire economy. New Orleans is built on tourism, but it suffers from a severe phenomenon known as economic leakage. Billions of dollars from tourists flow into the city, but they are immediately channeled into multinational hotel chains, corporate-owned restaurants, and souvenir shops. That money then flows right back out of the local economy. Meanwhile, the industry itself, the proliferation of short-term rentals and hospitality zones, drives up housing costs, pushing the local musicians, chefs, and artists who create the culture further and further out. The result's a hollow shell, a city that provides a cultural theme park for visitors, but retains so little of the profit that it cannot fund a functional police force or repair its decaying infrastructure. New Orleans is a tragic warning that an economy built to service outsiders without investing in its own people will eventually consume itself. Number 2. Trenton, New Jersey. Just an hour from both Philadelphia and New York, Trenton should be thriving. It's the state capital of New Jersey, rich in history and strategically located. Instead, it's become one of the most dangerous and economically depressed cities in the Northeast. Trenton's violent crime rate hovers around 1,500 per 100,000 residents. Its factories shut down decades ago, and nearly 30% of its residents live in poverty. The greatest, most painful irony is that Trenton is the capital of one of the wealthiest states in America. This is not a failure of economics. This is a catastrophic failure in governance. The problem in Trenton isn't a lack of money. The state of New Jersey is overflowing with wealth. The problem is a lack of political will. Studies on state governance have shown that isolated capital cities, those like Trenton, that are geographically separate from the state's main economic centers, often receive less state spending on public goods. State lawmakers drive in from their wealthy suburbs, conduct their business in the Capitol building, and drive out. They drive around, not through, the decay, as the original video notes. It is a form of deliberate political neglect. Trenton is a powerful warning that a state's wealth is meaningless if its political class governs with apathy, or worse, with contempt for its own capital city. Number 1. Gary, Indiana. If there's one city that embodies the term forgotten America, it's Gary, Indiana. Once a booming steel town with over 180,000 residents in the 1960s, Gary was built by U.S. Steel and thrived on blue-collar dreams. Today, fewer than 65,000 people remain, and nearly 35% live below the poverty line. Its skyline tells the story: empty factories, crumbling schools, and streets where silence replaced industry. Gary's violent crime rate exceeds 1,900 per 100,000 residents. With nearly 1 in 3 properties abandoned, some blocks look like ghost towns. Gary's name has become shorthand for decline, a modern American tragedy. This is the final warning. This is the obituary for the 20th century industrial dream. Gary was a mono-economy. It was built by U.S. Steel, it lived for U.S. Steel, and when globalization and automation made that model obsolete, it died. Gary is the ghost of Christmas future for hundreds of American towns that are still dependent on a single factory, a single mine, or a single industry. It is what happens when jobs gone overseas, factories closed, and communities left behind becomes a political talking point instead of a national crisis demanding a transition plan. Gary, Indiana isn't just the most unsafe city in America. It is the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when a nation moves on and forgets the workers who built it. 10 cities, 10 tragedies, but not 10 isolated failures. Flint is a warning about our pipes. Los Angeles is a warning about our economy. Gary is a warning about our jobs. These are not hated cities. They are ignored cities. They are the canary in the coal mine, warning us of the systemic crises that are already here and that threaten us all. These 10 cities are a clear warning. But what about the next ones? In our next video, we investigate the 5 American cities showing the exact same warning signs that Gary and Flint did 10 years ago. Subscribe so you don't miss that critical report. The question is, are we listening? We want to hear your perspective. Which of these national trends, infrastructure, inequality, deindustrialization, do you see as the biggest threat to your own community? Share your thoughts in the comments below.